Being a professional isn't about the money you make, the position you hold, your level of expertise, or fame. It's the motivation and the attitude you bring to your work, a desire for always learning and improving, and balancing your creative output with getting the business done. Welcome and join the Creating Pros. Hi, and welcome back to Creating Pros. I'm your host, Jim Nettles. Last week, we talked a lot about the idea of self-censorship and how we look at work, how we start to decide what we're going to do, how we're going to approach it, and sometimes making the decision that we're not going to reveal certain pieces of work. We may not publish them, we may not submit them, we may not actually go out and shop certain kinds of work because, again, we think or somebody has told us maybe it's not appropriate for us to try to shop that, do that work, whatever the case may be. Maybe it's we've decided not to pursue that piece of work because we think that there could be some negative repercussions, that the opinions we get from people, that the ideas are not going to be well received, right? And there's times that this can be very true. There are times that maybe we have a good idea, we've not executed on it well. Maybe there's times that there are things that we cannot take and talk about or explore effectively as writers, no matter how much research we do, no matter how much work we do. But the other side of this is at times we will stop ourselves from going about exploring ideas that have meaning to us and could have meaning to others. And one of the things that I think that I've seen happen a lot is kind of the other side of this. Well, if I don't explore, if I do not take a look at, if I don't challenge myself with certain kinds of work, how do I make sure to keep it meaningful? How do I make sure that it's still meaningful to me as the creator? How do I try to make sure that it's meaningful to my audience, to my readers, to my fans? And the short answer is it depends. What does meaningful mean? What is the importance of work being meaningful? If I'm doing something that is nonfiction, news, media, exploring a lot of the things that are happening in current events. For example, we've done a lot of talking about the current generative AI system going on and all the changes happening here. And it's important enough that when I just released the second edition of Business Essentials for Writers, I included an entire chapter on it. I'll be leaving for DragonCon here later today, and I'm doing a number of panels where we're in and talking about both the positives, the negatives, the problems with generative AI. What is it going to mean for business? What's it going to mean for creatives? Well, so exploring things like that becomes meaningful because knowledge, skills, expertise, and informed opinions can help then sculpt and craft and inform other people on how to potentially look at things. Doesn't mean that the creator of that, the crafter of the argument is always right. It should, though, be the idea that they're crafting an argument so that you can follow up on that and look at what the research is in total. Look at what is important about a given idea or a given challenge. When we look at fiction, and obviously this is a place where we often self-censor. We may or may not include certain characters. We may or may not include certain backstories. We may or may not include certain kinds of events in the process. And if I'm going about that process well, and I'm thinking about it and it's informed, one of the things that we have to ask is, by removing certain ideas, am I taking away part of the meaning of it? Am I reducing some of the meaningfulness of the work? Am I reducing some of the impact of the work? Am I taking away part of the fundamental idea that I want to explore and I want readers to be entertained by or to be considerate of? So when we look at all of these ideas, is it important to consider the meaning of things? Is it important to consider, is it meaningful to me as the creator? And is it meaningful to those fans when I start looking at some of these ideas? So what do I mean by meaningful? Well, is it important? Is it something that to me has impact on me as the creator? Is it something that I think exploring the idea has a potential for reaching someone or making them think in a different way, or at least consider different options. And this is one of the first big things we have to look at is why, as creators, why are we doing what we do? Because yes, there's a part of it here, which is the idea as creators, we're running a business, we're creating products, we're doing things that are looking to push forward our business and our personal growth. And I think that it is important to remember both of those parts. We have to look at those things that help push the business forward. What's work that's going to sell? What's work that will reach an audience large enough to move those books, those stories that work? And by moving product, that also inherently means I'm reaching and finding and touching some sort of an audience. I'm having meaning to those people that are reading or watching or consuming my material in some way, shape, or form. The second part of meaningfulness, though, and I often think this is the more important one, is when we're crafting something, when we're creating something, when we're exploring an idea, when we're telling that story, what are the core ideas behind it that we're playing with? Often as writers, we are processing the things happening in our own lives. We are looking at and looking at the challenges facing us, changing the challenges that are facing our friends, our family, the world at large. Because again, we are still part of the world at large. And part of the job of the creator is to be there as a commentary, to be there to reflect how portions of culture view certain events, certain ideas, certain times. And when we look at and think about this from the idea of meaning, if I, as a creator, am not finding meaning in the work that I'm doing, I'm not enjoying it, I'm not exploring something that really has solid reflection for me. If I am just cranking out the words to crank out the product, we see this happen a lot of the time. For example, let's think about tie-in novels, tie-in work. Well, a lot of the time, you've got a lot of constraints around you. Now, the meaning can still be you get to explore favorite characters, you get to explore new things about given properties and worlds and things like this. Can have great meaning and great value. Other times, it can be rinse and repeat, but that doesn't mean that you aren't reaching readers with something of meaning, because when we look at a lot of these kinds of properties, whether it is something like a Star Wars property or something like a Hallmark property, a Harlequin novels property, we look at horror properties like Alien or some of these others. We look at comics properties. Getting to write and tell our stories in those kinds of universes can still have tremendous meaning, because we can explore with a given character, a given person, a given entity, what happens if we put them through a given kind of challenge, a given kind of trial, a given kind of experience. How do we think that they would react, and how well do we tell that story? If they're our stories, our properties, our universes, well, then we know them inherently better than anyone else, or at least we think we do. And when we're exploring those stories, those ideas, that's where things also tend to come out that are much more personal, that are ideas that are flowing around our heads, things that potentially are letting us process and explore our lives, our experiences, and our interests. Maybe we were watching and we're starting to work on a story where there is great internal conflict and politics. Well, that would be reflective of the world we're currently in. Maybe I'm working on a story that is about relationships. Maybe I'm working on the story that is about how a couple of people connect and form and work together. Maybe it's about relationships between two people that's a romantic relationship or not a romantic relationship. Well, often what happens when we're building those relationships, it's reflecting what's happening in our own lives, even when we as creators are not conscious of it. It's always kind of interesting to talk to fellow creators who say, I went back and reread that book, that story I wrote 5 or 10 years ago, and I look back and that was the same period of time that I lost a family member. I had a breakup going on, whatever the case may be. And it's always kind of a fascinating experience to see how we as creators, when we look back at work we did in the past, how does that reflect the time that we were in when we created that? And how have we grown, developed since then? Are there things that give us more meaning since then and it's more meaningful? And this is one of those things where I think there's value in going back and exploring and looking at some of our prior work. Now, it can be cringeworthy, let's be honest, because we look at things and go, yeah, I'd have not done that way today. I'd do it in a different way. I'd do it in a better way. Well, part of the value there is recognizing our own growth, our own development. And all of these things have tremendous meaning if we look at them that way. If we absorb these things, recognizing, oh, I've grown because I went from point A to point B. And I see the journey I've been through along the way. When we're going through the act of creation, when we're going through and developing a new work, a new product, something along these lines, when we're going through that process, if we're being thoughtful and intentional while we do this, then the meaningfulness will come out. Inherently, it's already there. The question is, how will it be represented? And are we conscious of it? Are we embodying those things that have that meaning so that when the work comes out the back end, when the work is produced, when the work is put in the reader's hands, the viewer's hands, do they get the meaning from it as well? Do they get the ideas we wanted to explore? And it's in this idea of meaningfulness that often I believe is where the act of co-creation happens between the creator and the consumer, the experiencer. Because if we've done this well, then what happens is the reader, that consumer, the viewer, the listener, when they go through that, they're always going to be running it through the filter of their own knowledge, their own experiences, which will be different from that of the creator. And often it will be radically different from that of the creator, between the creator and consumer, which is how we have to recognize when we reach meaning between two people that are that diverse in thought, diverse in background. If we can find meaning and connection there, that's when we know that we've found that real level of meaningfulness and the ability to communicate what was important to us and help find something that's important to that reader. So as you're looking and thinking about ideas of what do I include in work? Do I self-censor? Do I take a risk? Take a look at these ideas and balance upon that. Is this something that has meaning to me? Is this something that could be meaningful to the reader and the consumer? Am I taking something out that has a potential to have great impact? This is something we see in every business, not just creative businesses. We have to make decisions like this about making sure that what we're doing, what we're building, what we're making, what we're selling is meaningful. Because at the end of the day, if it's not meaningful, if it's not purposeful, if it's not connecting with the person, then the value exchange of somebody buying that for money is short-lived, if any meaning at all. Now, there are things that we obviously do every day that have meaning no more beyond basics. I need, food, sustenance, shelter, clothing. But those things can either be very simple and very basic, and the meaning is simply it gets me from point A to point B, or they can be things that are extremely important to us as the consumers. I may get something to eat that brings great joy and flavor and taste and texture. Maybe I will be, wearing something I think that, reflects who I am, or is something fun to wear, something that reflects more about who I am. Maybe it's just simply the idea of I'm walking into an experience, I'm reading a book, I'm watching a movie, I'm watching a TV show, I'm taking a walk in a park. Those sorts of things can have great meaning, and that meaning doesn't have to stop at that moment, at that experience. These things that have meaning can stretch over days, weeks, months, years, lifetimes. And so that's one of those things that I think we as creators need to keep in mind, is that sometimes our reach goes well beyond the few moments that somebody is first exposed to the idea, the thought, or the work. So until next week, this has been Creating Prose, and I'm your host, Jim Nettles.